Kia ora koutou. Just going to start us off with a karakia to start us off well. Kia hora te moreno, kia whakapapa punamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. May peace be widespread, may the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for us all this day. Give love, receive love, let us show respect for each other. Kia ora and welcome. It's so wonderful to have everybody here. Ko Zoe Lyon Gifford Takuingoa. I am the Inclusion and Diversity Partnership Manager at Waihanga Aotearoa. So in terms of this mahi, Waihanga Aotearoa and Hanga Aotearoa have been working together as workforce development councils to create this resource and these guidelines. It's so important to give everyone the skills to be able to be active bystanders and to give workplaces and individuals the ability to be able to thrive at work no matter who they are. So we're really excited and understand that this is such an important part of the work that we're doing in the industries that we are supporting. I want to thank all involved, especially Angela Meyer, who was a big part of putting together these guidelines, and all the people from within the industry who shared their stories and who reviewed the guidelines to make sure that they were fit for purpose. So please sit back, make yourselves comfortable. You're welcome to eat some kai if you want to during your lunch break. And join me in welcoming Amy Crookston from RespectEd. So Amy, I'm passing the raka over to you. Welcome.
Kia ora, Zoe. Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Welcome to this lovely, well, I'm in Wellington and it's a lovely sunny but freezing cold day here. So hopefully you're getting a bit of sun in your lunch hour as well. We are going to have a look at a few things today. And I'm going to just start off by telling you who I am. So I work for RespectEd Aotearoa. They are a prevention organisation that goes into schools and workplaces and communities and supports them with the idea around how to prevent specifically sexual harm and sexual harassment in workplaces, but also a little bit in the bullying space, as it aligns nicely sometimes. We have been set up by these wonderful organisations in Wellington Sexual Abuse Help, who supports people of all ages, all genders that have been harmed by sexual violence, and Wellington Rape Crisis, who supports all people aged over 13 of all genders that have also been around harm of sexual violence, and WellStop, which is an amazing organisation that supports people to not perpetuate sexual violence. These amazing organisations a few years back, I'm thinking like 2014, so not too long ago, wanted to not just be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, so they developed this amazing RespectEd Aotearoa. So we come in at the top of the cliff and try to stop people falling off and needing their support. So that's just a little bit about them. And for me, I have spent quite a lot of time recently going into some of the organisations that support your apprentices and in your employing spaces around what can be done to prevent harm from happening beforehand. And I know that a lot of you are already really aware of how to do that, because we are thinking about our health and safety lens all the time, right? We're thinking about where to put the cords so somebody doesn't trip over them, making sure that everybody's wearing the right protective stuff so that nobody gets, I don't know, loses an eye or an arm. We like to think about preparing so that we don't have to deal with a response, right? And so this is just the same. We have to go in with this idea that we can stop this kind of harm happening, the psychological harm and the physical harm of these of bullying and sexual harassment to our fellow workers by preparing well. Might look a bit like policy, but it also might look about procedures, you know, the things, putting the cords away, preventing it from happening in the first place. And if it does, what's a really good appropriate response for that at the end. So one of the ways, the most proven way to prevent harm from happening in this area is bystander intervention. We do a whole lot of courses on this, so feel free to contact us at some point to unpack how to do this. I'm going to do a very brief introduction about what it's about and some of the kind of early parts to bystander intervention. So bystander intervention is based on this theory. It's actually kind of like a mishmash of a few different psychological theories that all hold up really, really well. It has so much research behind it, and it really does work. This is the kind of way your brain goes about looking at things when it sees something happening. In order for you to get to number 5, as in do some sort of action to prevent this harm from happening, you actually need to go through all of these first. And noticing that something is happening is the first part. So if you're walking around not noticing some sort of verbal behavior, some jokes, or not noticing that they're happening because you're busy doing something else, of course, you're not going to be able to do anything about it, right? You also have to interpret it as a problem. So let's say you hear a really random joke that you're like, hey, that's really kind of not on. That might be interpreting it as a problem. You might go, that's not really that big a deal. You're not interpreting it as a problem. Sometimes we have to consider maybe the problem, maybe it's a problem for other people and not for us, and that's important too, right? So just because it's not a problem for you doesn't mean it might not be a problem for somebody else. So you can also think of it like that. Then we have to go, whose responsibility is this, right? So sometimes it's the responsibility of our leadership to show that this isn't okay. But often it's actually our colleagues, right? It's the people around us. It's our family, it's our whānau, it's our friends. And we have to kind of think, well, maybe I have a little bit of responsibility here to do something about that. And sometimes that might look like, you know, putting your hand up and putting yourself out there, and that can be a bit scary. And sometimes it's actually just about looking for somebody else to help you. So that's another way that you can take responsibility. Then we're going to decide how to help. The how to help is there's a few different ways that you could do that, and then you take action to provide help. Today I'm going to look at the first 2 and 3. I'm going to talk briefly about some of the ways that you might better help, but I'm not going into detail on those. That might be for another time. So first of all, we have to think about noticing the behaviors in our organization. So these are the things that we talk about in our workshops. The first one is the impact of a behavior versus the intent of a behavior. How many people have accidentally opened their mouth, said a joke, said something mean, I don't know, said something they possibly didn't even believe. It came out of their mouth and they went, oh my God, I really wish I hadn't done that. My intention was to be funny, but now I realize the impact was actually it wasn't very nice. The people around me, the impact didn't land very well, or this person might have been harmed by this. So we need to remember that a lot of the time we're walking around saying things, doing things. We're not intending to harm people, but sometimes we are. It's okay to take responsibility for that. One of the ways that we look at this is it's very hard to prove intent except in a criminal court. We walk around, how do we know what other people's intentions are? We probably could ask them, but even then. So actually what I really want people to think about is focusing on the impact. So we want to focus on the impact of people around us, the people we are talking to, the people we are interacting with. How do they feel about this behavior? And if they tell you that they're impacted by this behavior, you might want to consider, well, despite my intention, which might have been to be friendly or compliment somebody, this person has taken it in a different way and they don't like it. Maybe I should consider that. Maybe I should think about that. We also talk a lot about labeling behavior, not people. So we're thinking about if you are going to call somebody a bully, how hard is it for that person to choose not to bully? They're now labeled. Everybody calls them a bully, and now they're a bad person. we want to talk about how people do behavior. They harm others all the time. How can they not do that? How can they choose not to do that? So when we're talking about calling out behavior, we want to call out the behavior, but like you do with a small child. You don't call them a bad child, naughty child. You don't call people bad people. You say that choice for that behavior, that wasn't cool. You might say to the child, I don't like that behavior that you did. I don't like that you hit your friend. And it's the same with adults. We want people to come back from behavior. We want them to think about that behavior and stop doing it. And we know that people that are told that they are bad or just doing the wrong thing all the time, and therefore they are a bully or useless or stupid, they're not going to do that, right? On the flip side of this, we're also talking about people who've been harmed. So we want to talk about people in a much more wider context. If a person has been harmed in any situation, but let's say sexual harassment, they might want to label themselves as a victim or survivor. Totally fine, obviously. If you're not sure, you can use the words a person who's been harmed, and that gives everybody a wider context for harm, because harm is happening when you're saying mean things to people, when you're saying harmful things about their ethnicity, when you're saying harmful things about if you're talking about their sex life in front of other people, that can be harmful, but they may not think of that as violence. And this is all very important. I'll explain to you later in a few moments about why this is important. So a victim survivor led, when you're thinking about your environment, you want to consider that the prevention needs to be centered around the needs of the person that might be harmed. And so that looks like a victim survivor led lens. That doesn't mean that we don't balance that with the needs of everybody. It just means that the specific needs around the potential trauma for this are considered in the situation. We've got spectrum versus severity up here. Now, I'd normally ask people, and I know that you can't respond to me right now, but in this instance, sometimes we think of these things as kind of similar. But if we think of severity as a ranking, so if we've got a severity of harm, we've got the least worst to the most worst, right? How do we know what the least and the most worst is? Well, we could look at some data, right? We could make some understandings across what the majority of people might think, that somebody having an unwanted hug is probably not as severe as being smacked across the face, right? Maybe. However, on an individual basis, people respond differently to different kinds of harms. So for some people, that unwanted hug might trigger a whole lot of other behaviours that have happened to them in the past. It also might be culturally inappropriate, and therefore it might be ranked a lot higher than you might think. The slap across the face, obviously not great. This is physical assault. However, how a person responds to that will be determined by all the other things that have come into play up until this point in their life and all the things that surround them in their environment. So we want to think about individuals in a spectrum of behaviours and how they feel about those behaviours. And we can think about severity probably in a more population-wide context. Certainly the legal system has an understanding of severity. It's less helpful in your workplaces. The last one, I really like this, this phrase, men can be powerful agents for change. I work in a lot of places that are male dominant. These are the people that have the ability to make the changes in those workplaces. We need everybody buying in, right? Men listen to other men more than they might listen to a female colleague. And that means that you actually, if you're a man standing in a virtual world there, have a better chance of being heard and potentially a louder voice and less safety issues. We've been able to step forward and say, hey, mate, that's not okay. We don't do that here. Okay, so we have something we call a behavior traffic light. This is an exercise that I'll do with people in groups within your workplace. And the idea of this is that everybody has a line, right, around behavior. So I want you to think about that. Where's your line for behavior? Say if I said to you, how do you feel about hugs? Some people are huggers. Some people are definitely not. Some people, sometimes I'm a hugger. Where's your threshold? Where's your line? So these are the questions I'm going to ask. What kind of behavior do I like to see at work? What makes me unsafe, feel unsafe or uncomfortable, and where do I draw that line? I'll show you I'm going to change screens, so give me 2 seconds to do this. There we go. Right, hopefully you see a new screen here. So this is a little exercise we're going to do. I want everybody to answer, where would you place jokes about gender, sex, or sexuality? Would it be in the green? Yep, we're all good with that. That's pretty much fine all the time. Would it be red? Yeah, that's not a real good thing at my workplace. We don't do that. That's not cool. We're not okay with that. Or amber, which is kind of something else. Maybe in the middle, maybe it depends on other things. So if you could answer that, and then we'll see the results. So everybody will see there's quite a few different behaviors there. Some of them like, I don't know, hugging someone with their consent. They said yes, right? They were like cool with it. They're happy. Yep. Okay, so here we go. Here's the results. I hope everybody can see those. So jokes about gender, sex, or sexuality. So we've got 66% said, nah, never, not cool. This doesn't work. And some people here, we've got 34 are in amber and none in green. Okay, cool. So we are talking about our workplace, right? So at home, maybe with your best mate, where you've both got a very similar understanding of the way that you're having these jokes. I know in the rainbow community, we have our own jokes about these things and it's not harmful, so it's okay, right? But when we're at work, we might want to be a little bit more careful about that and think about who we're having these jokes with. So sometimes it will definitely be over here, right? So we've got a verbal behavior, jokes about gender, sex, or sexuality. Hey, we're probably not going to do that if we're a manager or an employer with our employees. It's probably inappropriate. However, maybe we are having a joke with some friends. We know each other really well, and it's our relationship is pretty well developed, and we know their sense of humor, and they understand that we're not trying to, and there's no harm happening to them. Cool, great, perfect. We could probably go, hey, maybe somewhere in between here, it's probably okay a little bit. What about if we were having these jokes in front of another person in our environment? So if we think about the environment of the workplace has to be safe for everybody. So perhaps there's somebody in your environment that this joke is really offensive to, or they just don't want to hear it, to be honest. It's not helping them in their work. And so we need to consider them in this space. So we've got context. It determines whether it's going to be in that amber zone is kind of context, relationships. Have the people all consented to be kind of in that space with you having that kind of joke? We have all kinds of other ways that you might consider what is important in that space. There's a few other ones in here which are really interesting to me. So comments about a person's body. So we might say to them, hey, I really like your shoes. your feet look really small in them. I don't know. It's a bit weird, right? A little bit awkward. Maybe it's not necessary. Maybe small feet are a thing for certain people. They certainly come up as a fetish in some spaces. It's a comment about a person's body. We might comment, hey, I really like your hair. That might be okay. It might not be as well. Somebody might just not like you commenting on their body, and that's okay too. So we come back to the intent versus impact. The intention was to give a compliment. It may well have been genuine. And the other person is like, oh, I don't like it when people comment on my body. It makes me feel really nervous and anxious. And now I'm wondering why. Why are they commenting? We've got other things here. So digital. Behaviors that are digital also come in as potentially harmful, right? And are certainly covered by our by the definitions around sexual harassment. And this, so if we're sending messages, images, or videos to our colleagues, probably, unless they are your partner, you probably want to put that over here, right? At home, this might be okay for you and your partner. You do have to consider some of the legal aspects of sending anything that that involves nudity. We've got a few other ones here. Nicknames based around ethnicity. So if I have a friend and we are both and we're both Māori, and we might have an in-joke that is based around our ethnicity. We're not harming each other. However, that is a very different relationship to most of the work relationships that you'll have. And so perhaps you might want to consider that it sits somewhere in this amber zone, or what is more likely, somewhere over here, right? Because that can be an incredibly offensive way to address somebody. So I'm just looking at some of these questions here. Great question about, can people really consent in the workplace where there are power and relationship dynamics? Yeah, that's a really challenging question and a really insightful one. That is something that people need to navigate, right? Because when there's power, which there is inherently in most organizations, somebody employs you, right? They have the ability to not employ you. There is a hierarchy where somebody's managing you perhaps, and somebody else is managing them, and all of those things come into play. So if we consider that when you hold power, one of the things you do need to consider is that with a colleague, some of these behaviors, you might be able to think that might be okay. We know each other. There's a balance. But as soon as you hold power over somebody else's, well, livelihood, to be honest, or in many other kinds of ways that you might hold power through invented social hierarchies like gender and race and all of those things, you need to consider a bit more about, can this person actually consent to this, or are they just doing it because because I expect them to? Acknowledging that within yourself means you need to consider what kinds of behaviors you might even choose to put out there, right? So great question. And the more we know people, the more we can understand where that line might lie. And everybody's line is going to be different. Whenever I do this exercise, I watch people, because it has to be a consensus, because there might be 6 people, but there's only one piece of paper that you can shift around, or only one behavior at a time. Sometimes people will have polar opposites of what is appropriate in their workplace, or for them in their workplace. And then we start to understand why we have to consider other people in this space, and not just what we think is okay. So When I do this exercise, I also realize that people are probably feeling a little bit like they're walking on eggshells right now, because they go, well, hang on, I thought that there was a very black and white understanding of what is and isn't appropriate in a workplace. And unfortunately, that's not true, right? We can't do that. Each workplace will be different. Each individual in those workplaces will be different. The power that's at play changes and fluxes. And so we need to consider on an individual basis each interaction we have, which can make you feel really uncomfortable because you don't want to get it wrong. And I'm here to tell you that you are going to get it wrong. And that as long as you're aware that you do something about it, and you think about what you've done and consider the other person in that equation when they tell you. You won't always know. We're all going to walk around making these mistakes. But the more we can think about it and the more aware we are, then the more likely we are to have a psychologically safe workplace, which is the prevention part of preventing bullying and harassment. Okay, I'm going to change sharing. Okay. All right, so I have another kind of interactive thing that we like to do. Before that, I'm going to have a look at these questions again. Great question. So, oh, where's it gone? In construction workplaces, the people on site can be changing regularly, e.g. subbies. How do you navigate these in workplaces? Yeah, and they are changing all the time. And to be honest, bystander intervention and the way that you go about this is a group norm change. It's everybody working together, everybody going, boy, that's not okay. Oh, no, hey, we don't do that here. It isn't one person putting their neck out and saying, nah, because if you do that, then there are safety issues for that person. There are power challenges for that person. The exceptions to that might be, you know, your upper leadership who have much greater power to be able to put their neck out on this, right? But if we're thinking about subbies coming in, yeah, they're coming from different places. They have different understandings about what's acceptable, but that doesn't mean that the greater majority, which is the people that you work with, you know, probably every day, can't gently say, oh, hey, mate, we don't do that here. That's really offensive. Or that kind of behavior, yeah, if you're going to do that, you know, maybe go to a different work site. You can do that. You can navigate that with them, though I would possibly recommend, and this is what we've been doing for a long time now, is just extending your training to them, you know, as well. You can include them as part of your workforce. And I recognize that they're varied and there's lots of them. But, you know, this is the way to move forward together. There's another question here I'm just going to have a look at. Cool. Okay. So I'm going to address this question with the next part of the presentation, actually. But it says, it is quite hard. There are very much power issues, and sometimes I find that I have to let go of what is said and done, often microaggressions, cool word, and then I have to choose to direct my energy towards combating these issues in a more meaningful and systematic ways. Yeah, interesting. So what I'm going to show you now might speak to that, and I'll come back to it. Just going to change my share. Okay, here we go. Cool. So this is another sort of exercise that we do. And it might speak to this idea of microaggressions a little bit. So here we have a pyramid. I'm not going to tell you exactly what this pyramid is for just yet. But in the poll that's going to pop up in a minute, there's going to be a question about where to place the this little post-it here. That's the bigger one, actually. Boys will be boys. Where does that belong? Does it belong as an idea, attitude, structure, or belief, which is down in this blue area? Does it belong in a verbal expression? or does it belong in a physical behavior? If Ash, if you could just pop that that poll up for us, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Cool. And while you're doing that, I'm going to have a little look-see. So in groups, we usually have a little play with these. Again, everybody gets to decide together where they go. So one person can't tell you where they go. 6 people have to agree, which is an exercise in itself, right? And so we place these in different places according to what we think they are, but again, what other people might think. So I'll come back to boys will be boys when the poll is finished. But if we think about racism, where would racism sit? Is it an idea, structure, and belief? Yeah, absolutely. Of course it is. Yeah. Is it a verbal expression? Absolutely can be, right? We can express our racism. Is it a physical behavior? Yeah, it can be, right? We can physically harm people with the idea, attitude, structure of racism. And even at this very extreme top, and this is what I call the physical behavior at the top, that's the extreme behavior, people die because of racism. Yeah. So if we think about racism, it could sit in any of these places. How's the poll going? Are we through that? All right. So thanks for sharing that. What we've got here is 39% think it belongs in blue at the bottom, idea, attitude, structure, belief, and a verbal expression for 13, all of the above for 48. Yep. So isn't it interesting how we all have like different views in both these polls? And sometimes we think everybody thinks like us, which is kind of the way your brain works. It tries to do that to you. It defaults to that when we're not using our prefrontal cortex to do the cognitive thinking about it, right? So it's understandable. But if we actually did some thinking about it, we'd realize, of course, that it's true that other people do think differently to us, and sometimes really, really differently. So in this space, we saw boys will be boys. It is definitely an attitude structure, an attitude or an idea that boys, that kind of makes us think that, well, of course they did this. They're boys. That's what they do, and it kind of lets people off the hook. We also have it as a verbal expression because obviously people say that as an expression. A physical behavior, a way that might manifest as a physical behavior. Oh, well, boys just like to be physical with each other. Now, I've got 3 older boys, and they certainly like to wrestle each other. It's hilarious sometimes. Thankfully, they're all the same size now, and they all know their limits, and they don't hurt each other. When they were little, it was a whole nother thing. But what if the person that's doing that physical behavior with them doesn't enjoy that? Maybe that's not something that they like. Maybe it crosses their line. Boys will be boys excludes their need for safety. It's their body. It excludes their the way that they want to participate in the world and be interacting with their peers. And that is why it could become a physical behavior. Now, the reason why we have this pyramid isn't to say, we're going to go back to that idea of spectrum versus severity. Yeah, sure, we could look at this and go, okay, some of these behaviors are maybe less extreme than others. Maybe there's a hierarchy here, sure. But actually, if we come back to the impact on the person, and we think about spectrum, can we really say that racism is, if we put racism down here, is it less bad than rape when racism could mean death? Is it really, can we really say that? We think about institutional racism, structural racism, these are pretty harmful too. So what this is about is showing that in this blue area down the bottom, That's where the majority of stuff is happening. This is happening everywhere. There's a lot of it. That's why there's a big blue area. It also is the base. It's the base for a whole lot of things to be accepted in our workplace, in our community, in our environment, in our social structures. And then we go to yellow. So that's a verbal expression. If we're accepting put downs based on racism, in that yellow space, I mean, yeah, they're pretty horrible. They're not nice, but nobody died. However, there's less of that happening, but it's still pretty big. And if that put down turns into, let me think, can I find one? Well, could use that one. What about, and then that put down turns into yelling. And then somehow we have trespassing on somebody's personal space, getting in their face. And then we have throwing objects. Suddenly, I don't know, that person has just small things thrown at them or large things thrown at them because for whatever reason, we have an escalation happening. And then we have, where's it gone? Okay, can't find assault right now. It might be hiding. Oh, there we go. And then we have assault, right? Up here. So we can have an escalation of racism all the way through here, as we can have an escalation of sexism or other kinds of structural things that harm people. So this is about escalation. When we normalize in the yellow, these verbal expressions, we enable an environment that might, and not for everybody, right? Because it gets smaller, there's less people in this grey area, but it might enable people that choose to do behaviours that physically harm people to feel like they can. And then that grey space is where, if we normalise this, physical behaviours, let's just say, I don't know, throwing pieces, like rolled up, scrunched up pieces of paper at people's heads for fun. If we normalise that, how are we then normalizing that, like another kind of physical assault, like a shoulder barge might be okay? And if we normalize shoulder barges, are we now normalizing that maybe it's okay to kind of punch somebody a bit every so often? So you can see how this is a pyramid of escalation. And when we normalize behaviors in our environment by allowing those microaggressions to happen, you know, using gay as an insult, or saying a sexist joke, if we normalize those, we run the risk of normalizing these. And that can be a problem, because by the time we get to this top part here, it's really hard to change. But if we are using bystander intervention in the grey and the yellow, by calling that behavior out, finding somebody to talk to about it, to say, hey, manager or employer, hey, this is happening. And if we keep doing this, then this environment's not going to be a very nice place to work in, and we're probably going to see some worse behaviors happening. Or pulling your mate aside and going, hey, this is just, honestly, we just don't need that here. Let's just try and keep it clean, or let's just try and keep it kind, or whatever you want to say to them. You can do all of these things in yellow and even in the grey area relatively easily, and that's what prevents that top triangle. I know that it seems crazy that we can prevent things from happening just by changing an environment, but it's the same when you're changing your environment from any health and safety kind of aspect, isn't it? You go into the environment, you look for the risks, you look for the hazards, and you eliminate them. And this is what you're doing. Cool. Any questions coming up? Just having a look over here. Yeah, so there's a question here, is how important is it to understand the prevalence of the spectrum of trauma that inevitably exists in everyone's lives? I personally think it's really important, because if we're generalizing across populations, we're not meeting individuals' needs. So if we think about anybody who's living on this earth has had experiences. Those experiences can be positive, they can be negative. Sometimes those experiences create trauma for a person. Sometimes they're just experiences they don't want to repeat. And sometimes in our workplaces, we might invariably trigger some of those things for people. And we need to understand that everybody has the right to decide what kind of behavior they're happy to accept for themselves. That's called a boundary. And that means that even if we don't agree with that behavior being a problem, we have to recognize and acknowledge and allow for that behavior to be a problem for another person. And trauma certainly comes into play here. So consider always that just by being kind in the way that you think being kind, by giving a compliment may not be appropriate for another person. It may not feel kind and they don't have to accept that. I hope that answered that question. Thank you for the question. Cool. I've got another question here. Really insightful question. So we're talking about hugs on the first day, right? And so for some people, hugs on the first day will not be okay. But what if we think about how there could be a pōwhiri, right? And respecting tikanga and customs and protocols. So appreciate that as well. Absolutely. And so it is important to participate in these spaces and recognise the cultural value of tangata whenua and the strength that they bring into these spaces, and the way that these rituals are actually there for a reason, to set up well-being, to set up manaakitanga, to set up a space where people are respected. So there are some physical aspects to this, like hongi sometimes. Sometimes it's a kiss on the cheek or a hug. And if a person is participating in these, they may feel, I think that most people recognize the value in those experiences. However, if a person has been traumatized in a way that a physical touch is so upsetting to them and concerning, they may choose to participate, but just in a slightly altered way. So I'm going to use if you were to go through the pōwhiri and come up to a person and go, okay, now's the time that I would normally hongi, touch noses and breathe each other's breath. Maybe I choose to front foot that, and I choose to put my hand out for a handshake. There's also cultures in this world where there is a differentiation about what is okay for a woman or a man to physically do. So I have noticed that there are women that, instead of shaking hands with a man, will put their hand to their shoulder and just nod. And I think we are respecting each other's cultures while trying to participate together and find a way through. I know that there are the tikanga for Māori can be changed by Māori, right? So it's not for me as Pākehā woman to change this, but there are, after the Christchurch earthquake, there was a marae who changed their tikanga so that they wore shoes inside. And the reason for that is that their people had all their feet cut when the earthquakes happened, because there was glass all over the floor and they had fear and anxiety around it. So they supported their whānau to look after themselves and care for their bodies in this way. I don't know that that was changed forever, but for that specific space, it was helpful. So maybe the question is that we have these conversations with each other, and we express our needs to each other, and we find a way to come to a consensus. So it's a really important question and can be really challenging. Cool. We got through a lot more than I expected. When we're talking about bystander intervention, which is what the piece of work, the guidelines that have been coming out are about, the bystander effect was created with some sort of, I don't know, people will probably remember the myth that goes with it, which is that a person was being murdered in a city in America, I think, and that nobody came. They could all hear her screaming and they couldn't, and nobody came to help. And then somebody went and thought psychologically, why? why wouldn't people help? And it is a slight myth, and it has been disproven that people did go and help. People actually did actively choose. They called their emergency services. They did try and intervene. However, the piece of work was based on that. And there are many reasons why a person might choose not to intervene into a situation. I'm sure you can think of them. So think of them now if you can. What might stop you from saying, oi, that's not cool here, or hey, I think maybe we need to step outside and have a chat. And these are the kinds of things that might pop up in your head. So it's really kind of not my job. Other people will help. There's other people here. So the idea of everybody else is there, so why should it be me? And everybody does that, so nobody helps. Not my problem. I'm busy. So I'm in a bit of a rush. There are other people here, I'm sure they'll have more time. They'll step in. In situations on airplanes where people are having heart attacks, there are doctors on board, some of which will go, oh, but there's probably somebody here more qualified than me. That literally happens to doctors on airplanes, which is crazy, right? And so everybody thinks there's somebody better qualified for this as well. So I don't know how to help. I'm not sure what to do. It might be dangerous. Yeah, absolutely. If there's a physical aspect to this as well, it could be dangerous, but also think about, is it dangerous safety-wise? Is my job at risk in this situation? So that's a very fair thing to ask, right? Is it dangerous for me? They'll probably get up soon anyway. So this is because there's a person on the floor. So if you've done first aid training, you'll know about this as well. The person, you might look at them and go, oh, they're probably drunk. They'll be fine. Or you could look at them and go, oh, they're having a heart attack. Both could be true. And you might decide one or the other, and that will determine whether you're going to bother to help them. Now, I still suggest helping drunk people, but anyway. So these are the kinds of things that pop up in your head and might stop you from helping. But these are the kinds of things that you might do to help. We have calling out, which is like, oi, mate, that's not okay. You have to be confident, you have to be assertive, you have to be calm. Gosh, don't do this. Don't do this if you're angry, because it'll only make it worse, right? So just chill out and go, oi, nah, not okay. Distract. This one is when things are going wrong, like calling out, things are going wrong right now, you want to stop it in the moment. And so it looks like interrupting them. Oh, hey, such and such wants to see you over on the other site. Can you come with me? Or, hey, I think I left something over here and I need your help to find it, or whatever it is that you can think of. Sometimes you get two people and you go, you might go to a friend, hey, can you take them? I'll take them. Let's separate them. They're going to end up in some sort of situation in a minute. So you can do that. Or you could make a joke. A lot of people make jokes, appropriate jokes to kind of break the mood. I had a security officer and she said she used to go up to some very big, scary men at concerts, and she could see they were both about to go at each other, and she would ask them maths problems. Oi, hey, what's 10 plus 8? What do you mean? Broken the tension, and now there's a way of dealing with it. Delegate. You can find other people, like you can get other people to help you, or you could delegate a calling out to somebody. Hey, I don't really want to intervene in this situation, but I know you know them really well. Would you mind? I think there's a problem here. Or find somebody in authority, right? And then we've got calling in, which is kind of something's happened, but you haven't been able to intervene at the time, or perhaps it wasn't safe to do so, or there wasn't immediate harm happening, but you think maybe after you thought about it, you might want to do something about it. So you might go and talk to the person that you think might have been experiencing that harm. Hey, I saw that joke. I heard that joke happening about your ethnicity, and I just thought I wanted to check in with you because I wondered if it was a problem. Or hey, that thing that person did with their hand on your leg, I just wanted to check, are you okay? I'm just a little concerned for you. And they might want to talk to you about it. They may not. And with their permission, you might want to also go and talk with somebody who's doing the behavior later as well and go, hey, I saw this happen and I wondered about the other person, and I think maybe they felt really uncomfortable, or that wasn't something they wanted. Have you considered that? That's the kind of thing that you could do. Okay. these things only really, like we can all do an individual action, but when they really work, it's everybody working together with support from above. Yeah. And when others are calling out behavior or intervening in behavior, going, I saw you do that. Thanks for doing that. That was really helpful. I didn't know what to do. And then you can be that person that goes, yeah, okay, no problem. Thanks. Cool. I don't think there's any more questions.
Oh, well, Amy, thank you so much. That has been so insightful. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and your time with us today. I think that's given people a lot to think about. Thank you everyone for coming along as well. Please go and share what you've heard. Please reflect on what you've heard and think how you can use that information to support those people around you. I will end with the karakia, and again, Amy, thank you. Go well, and looking forward to seeing all of you next week as well. Kia hora ti moreno, kia whakapapa punamu ti moana, hei hoarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. May peace be widespread. May the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for us all this day. Give love, receive love. Let us show respect for each other. Ka kite.
Ka kite anō.